the 6-foot distinction between employees, which is up on the screen now. Julia, you want to lead us off with a couple of the questions about this requirement?
Sure. So how are operators supposed to handle the pathway for people to go? I'm thinking hallway to restrooms, or when they're just sort of passing each other. How should we handle interaction like that?
So I'm going to give you guys a kind of a big general on social distancing. So it is a requirement to social distance. How you're going to do that really is going to be based on your layout at your restaurant, how you can make sure that people, employees, including to the owners and everybody, to be social distance by 6 feet. That includes the cooks and all staff. So and there's a lot of questions in this area, so I just wanted to put on the table right away that it is the social distancing by 6 foot is a requirement. So how you do that depends on how you can set up your business. One of the things, there's a question about, if cooking staff, they're in a small enclosed area, what can they do? You're going to probably have to stagger your guys' work schedules. You're probably going to have to put breaks at different times. When you have a narrow hallway, you probably would want to have some way to monitor that so that when someone needs to go down that hallway, there's somebody else not coming through that hallway. So like it's the bathroom, if you're putting up a sign saying one customer at a time, key, but you'll kind of have to figure out, you'll have to be creative to figure out how to do some of this stuff, but but the main requirement being that you have to social distance by 6 feet from L&I. That's what we'd be looking at if we came into your establishment.
So and just following up on that, when there's two people walking past each other, and if they both have protective equipment, like if two servers are walking past each other and they have masks on, et cetera, is that okay if they're not, in the same 6 foot bubble for a duration longer than a second or two as they pass? Is that type of scenario okay or safe for employees?
So I would say in phase 2, no. You're going to try to figure out how not to do that. If it happens because it just is an accidental thing, I mean, that could happen. But really try to figure out how you can, mitigate that. And so what would be a thing we wouldn't want to see is, well, I say, yeah, every once in a while that's okay. And then we decide, employers decide that, well, there's all these situations that we have to do that in. Instead, think about how can you mitigate those close contact times. Just at least through phase 2, once we get through the phases, we're kind of going to go back to normal and you don't have to worry about all this. But for right now, if you're opening, you're going to try to figure out how to social distance by that 6 foot and not, figure out how, you're going to have this closer contact at times. You just don't want to do that for now.
So Pam, help us understand a little bit, or maybe this is something we can clarify further as we go. And working with the governor's office, that was where feasible. And where it's not feasible, we simply need to have barriers or masks. So my own brain's having a hard time balancing the feasibility of you have to walk by people sometimes. And, in a kitchen to get from one end to the other, you have to walk by people sometimes. That's where we felt that the feasibility gave people some rational options to move around. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's a fair statement. The question about feasibility is going to be really based on, what all you've done to mitigate it. So, let's say that, for some reason, L&I is coming into your establishment and you have you tell us it wasn't feasible, but then we're going to take a look at your how you staggered your work staff and it could have been, then, that would be something we would probably be looking at. So, it really is case by case, and there isn't one great answer. That's the thing here it is more of, can you figure out how to do the social distancing by 6 foot? And if it's really just not feasible, maybe you don't have so many employees working at the time, or you try to figure out a different way to do the 6 foot. There are going to be situations where maybe it's not feasible, but that is when we do rely back onto the PPE and we do the hand washing, and that's why your safety plan for the COVID-19 is going to be very important. Is how are you going to deal with those points where you just can't social distance. But I just want to remind everybody, try to think about any kind of way to social distance by the 6 foot. So hopefully that answers the question.
So Julia, how would you summarize that before we move on to the next thing? You've heard kind of a conversation between feasibility and doing the best you can to keep people away. Could you give us your own interpretation from working in the governor's office and the agency of how would you summarize the conversation that Pam and I just had?
Sure. So at all times, employees need to be 6 feet apart. So operators need to make every and all effort to ensure that customers and employees are 6 feet apart. When that is not feasible, and Elle and I is really going to be looking at a number of things. Did you look at staggering work hours? Did you look at any other option to keep folks 6 feet apart? And if it's still not feasible, then employees need to have the personal protective equipment.
Okay, thank you. Pam, I'm just going to ask you a favor. I hate to give your click button an active thing, but we're getting a little bit of feedback.
Okay.
So if you can, in between the conversations, we can mute, then I think our participants might be able to hear you better. Julia, are there other areas in the 6 foot that we haven't answered yet with that dialogue? And if not, I'll kick it over to Sam for any questions in the chat room.
So I think I'm skimming through here, and I feel like we've covered this in length. I think there may still be questions about when delivering food to customers. So obviously, you're going to do that as far away as you can, but there will at some point be a break where you're less than 6 feet away from customers. So in that scenario, what type of personal protective equipment is needed?
And this will be the type of equipment we're expecting pretty much everybody to really be wearing. And so it's the some type of face mask, likely the cloth face mask, which everybody can more likely be able to attain, but the surgical face mask would also work. And then the type of gloves they might need.
Okay. I'm going to go next. I'm going to go back one screen. So Sam, we're going to come back to some PPE questions, but was there anything else on the 6 foot and the feasibility of keeping our employees safe?
Yeah, I think that the questions were answered. There's still just a lot of confusion in the back of house how you actually do the 6 foot distancing. But again, what I heard was you try your hardest, and if not, try to stagger shifts and schedule. And if that doesn't work because you have a small space, you really need to ensure that your employees have personal protective equipment. So I think it's been answered. We'll probably continue to get questions on that, but I think I've heard clearly.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to move on to the